Okay, so here are a few ways of invoking Apex. The first and the most simple way of invoking Apex is anonymous code block. Okay, what is anonymous code block? Anonymous code block is where you just write a code which can be executed one time. So you don't create a class, you don't create a method, and you don't store that code. And you don't need to store that code. So some code that is very dynamic and needs to be edited on the runtime, and you feel that okay, it's not a good idea to store it, so you can just execute that code, and it's something which is being used once. Okay, so I'll show you how to write that, but let's first of all see what are other ways of invoking Apex. Invoking Apex means calling the Apex. Okay, executing the Apex code. The second way of invoking Apex is through Apex trigger. That is something which we have seen. Visual force classes, that's also something that we have seen. Then another way of invoking Apex is asynchronous Apex. Asynchronous Apex is an Apex which is not in sync with, as the name suggests, synchronous, asynchronous. Asynchronous is something which is not in sync with what the end user is doing, right? Usually our Apex trigger is in sync with the end user operation. Let's say a data DML operation is happening, or let's say a page is being loaded. So it's in complete sync with the end user action. The moment I load the page, Apex runs in the backend. The moment I click on a button, the Apex runs. Okay, so this runs exactly in sync with the end user action. The moment someone is trying to save a record, Apex executes. Right? Do you think it will be a good idea to run Apex after 2 hours? You click on the button 2 hours later, the Apex runs. Will it be a good idea? No, right? Because the person has clicked on the button, he wants to see some action. Okay, but and whether it executes or it throws error, whatever it does, whether it's exceeding the governor limit or it does not have resources available, whatever happens, that method should execute, and either it should get completed or it should throw error. So that's the thing with the synchronous Apex. Asynchronous Apex is something which can run in the backend. All right. So there are few ways of calling a asynchronous Apex, which we're going to talk about. One is future method, Queueable Apex, Apex scheduler, and batch Apex. So I'll talk about all these things in details. Then there's another way of running Apex, that's called Apex email service. What is an Apex email service? It's a very simple thing. This is an Apex code which runs when you receive an email. Okay, the moment you receive an email, Apex code can run. Okay, so we start with anonymous code block. What is anonymous code block? Anonymous code block is Apex code that does not get stored in the metadata. So basically, we don't store it as a class or a method. Okay, but that can be compiled and executed using developer console. Okay, so from the developer console, we can execute this code. We can just write the code and we can execute it. Okay, and this does not have to be executed. Sorry, this code piece does not have to be stored anywhere in my metadata. You can use anonymous code blocks to quickly evaluate Apex on the fly, or to write code that changes dynamically and at runtime. Okay, so if you look in here, if I go to the developer console, so it's not always that I have to write a class and then write methods inside that. I can just go to my developer console, write some code, and try to execute that. Okay, so you can just go to the developer console, go to debug, open execute anonymous window, and you can write something. Sunday equals new account name equals my new account. Insert A. Okay, so let's say I just want to execute these two lines. I don't want to store it as a method or something. You can just go ahead and click on execute.
New.
Oh, sorry.
Account A equal to new. NEW.
Oh, new. Okay, execute it. Now, where's your account? Let's go to some other application. See, just got inserted. Right, so this way, you can just run a code block, and in case you're not willing to save the method and class, you just run it from here. Okay, so that's the anonymous code block, another way of invoking Apex. But this is also synchronous. The moment I click on execute, it gets executed. So synchronous Apex. Now Apex trigger and Visual Force classes we already know, so we will straight away now move into the asynchronous Apex. Asynchronous Apex is something which runs in the backend. Okay, and it is not in sync with the end user, so it's something which can automatically happen. Maybe some code that you want to run every Friday. Okay, and you don't want some end user to go and initiate that. You just want that to run every Friday. Some code that you keep want to run in batches. Some code that you want to run in future. All right, so that is what asynchronous Apex is. So asynchronous Apex, first type of asynchronous Apex is a future method. All right. So future method is basically making a method. We have created methods in Apex, making a method to execute in future. Okay. A future method runs in the background asynchronously. So it runs in the background asynchronously. It's a method only. It's a normal method, but it runs in the background. Okay. And it runs asynchronously. You can call a future method for executing long running operations. So if you have an operation which you feel that it's going to take some time, what you can do is you can always call a future method for executing that long running operation. Okay, so this is something which runs in future. Now you might be thinking future means what? Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, after 1 year. Future means when the resources become available. We have talked about governor limits, right? So we understand that Salesforce works with governor limits and there are the restrictions, right? So if the method is not able to execute right now because the resources are not available, it will get queued up and it will get executed when the resources become available. All right. If you're not using an asynchronous method, or if you're not using a future method, either the method gets executed or it gets cancelled. It throws an error. But future method is queued and it gets executed once the resources become available. Okay, so you can call a future method for executing long running operations or any operation you would like to run in its own thread on its own time. Okay, so any operation that you want to execute on its own thread on its own time. Each future method is queued and executes when system resources become available. So that's it. So the definition of future is this. It will execute when the resources become available. Till the time resources are not available, it will be queued in the line. Okay, so that's the good thing about it. If it's not a future method, normal method, either execute. If they don't find the resources available to get executed, they will just throw an error and they will get terminated. But future method gets queued up. To define a future method, it's very simple to define a method as a future method. You simply need to annotate it with the future annotation. So let's say this is your class and there's a method, public static void my future method, whatever method name. All that you have to do is you just have to use a at future annotation here. Okay, the moment you use this, that will become an asynchronous method. That's it, nothing else. So any method can be a future method. So once you make a method as a future method, it will get executed in future when the resources become available. So there is nothing that we actually need to do or change the code or something like that. Only this one word add future annotation will make your method future method. Clear? Okay. Now, okay. On the future method, methods with the future annotation must be static methods. Okay, so a future method cannot be a return method. Remember, we have created get methods which return an account name. So you cannot have a get method as a future method, because that is something which is waiting on the page. The page is waiting to get the value so that it can display on the page. So I cannot define that as a future method. The row. Um, it will, whenever the resources become available, then the you value will come on the page. So that will not happen. Okay. So your future methods has to be a static method, and only return type allowed is void method. So it should not have a return type. So my method should not be waiting for a return type there. It has to be a void method type. Okay. So future methods always will be static void. The specified parameter must be primitive data types. Okay. And in case you're passing on some parameter in the future method, that has to be primitive data type. Okay. Arrays of primitive data types or collection of primitive data types. Correct? So in case you're defining a future method, let's say I'm talking about creating a future method here. Public class my class, and then I say to add future. Public static void method. Okay, and in this, for this method you need to pass a parameter. Okay, let's say any parameter. So this parameter that you have to pass here has to be a primitive. Okay, this has to be a primitive. You cannot pass an S object parameter here. And do you know why? Just think about it. Why can't we pass S object parameter here? What can be the reason? I'm talking about a feature method, and the parameter that I can pass is only primitives, no S object. What can be the reason? Come on, quickly tell me. You know what is a primitive, right?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you think we cannot pass S objects here for future method? It's simple. See, if I am trying to execute the future method, okay, I initiate that. It will get executed when the resources become available, right? So let's say today you initiated you, and at the time you are initiating, at that time you will have to pass on the values for the parameter. And this future method, let's say, gets started executing tomorrow. In this meanwhile, that S object value can change, right? If someone has changed the values, then there will be a problem. That is the reason why future methods cannot pass specify, cannot pass the S object parameters. So all that you have to specify is a parameter that is either primitive, arrays of primitive, or collection of primitives. Make sense? Where S object values can change by that time. Okay. Methods with a future annotation cannot take S objects or objects as arguments. So they cannot take S objects as parameters for the simple reason, because the values can change by between when a future method was initiated by some user and by the time it gets executed. The reason why subject can't be passed as argument to future method is the subject might change between the time you call the method and the time it actually gets executed. So that's a very simple logic. In this case, so still if you have to do some operation or some changes on an S object, then what you can do is, in this case, the future method will get the old S object value and might override them. Okay. So what happens is the problem that happens with the future method is, if you pass on an S object value, then what happens? If there is a change, the future method will get the old S object values. It will check the old object values and override the new ones. So for that reason, to avoid that, we do not have an option of uh, passing as object arguments here for future method. Okay. So still, if you have to work, there is an alternative to that. Okay, if you have to work with some record, your future method needs to operate on some of the records in the database. Then what we have to do? What is the other option that we have available? There is a primitive data type which can fetch data. What is that primitive data type? ID. Remember, there is an ID primitive, right? So we have to work with ID there. To work with S objects that already exist in the database, pass the S object ID instead, or collection of IDs. Correct? So ID is a primitive. So what you can do is, you can pass IDs or collection of IDs and perform that query of IDs, so that the most up-to-date records are retrieved when the method is actually getting executed. Got it? So instead of you passing something like a list of account here, what you should be doing is, it's a future method, and let's say this is what you're doing: update accounts. Okay, so this is not the right way of writing the code, because if I supply the list of accounts here, and while it tries to do the update at by that time, if the values in those records have already changed, someone has changed, it will override them and put the old value. So that's not the correct way. So then what is the correct way? Pass a set of IDs here, AID, okay, a list of IDs, let's say, and then here you say list of account equals select, let's say, name from account ID in AID. Got it? And then update this. So now what is happening? It's just taking the IDs as parameters. Okay, so IDs are not gonna change. All right, correct? So this query happens when the method is actually getting executed. Earlier, what was happening? The data was being supplied initially, and then by the time it gets executed, there was a big chance that data gets updated or changed in the meanwhile. Please let me know if this is clear. If you understand this part, I think we are good on future method. All right.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, I think same example we are talking here. Okay. Now the next, so future method is just for one method. So any method you want to make that as a future method, you just need to go and put that add future annotation for that method, and that method will get executed in future. Next is queueable apex. Okay, the other type of asynchronous apex, which is called queueable apex. Okay. To take control of your asynchronous Apex processes by using the queueable interface. So you can use a queueable interface. Okay. So you can call this queueable interface on a class. So queueable is basically for a class. It's not for a method. So you can queue the, you can, for future method, what was happening? One method from the entire class can be a future method. What if I want to have multiple methods to be executed in future? Whenever the resources become available. When I say in future, I mean whenever the resources become available. I have a complete process. There are three methods which need to run one by one. And I want that entire process to get executed when the resources become available. Then you need to put them in a class and define a queueable interface for that class. Okay. And you know what is an interface? Interface is, what's an interface? Oops, concept?
User interface, right?
No, not user interface.
Page.
No. Interface is more like, let's say, a library kind of thing. Okay. So there are predefined interfaces, and when you say that, okay, fine, implement this interface on this class, then that class can use that library, predefined library. Okay, so queueable is for understanding, this is like a predefined library or a class, okay, which has some predefined methods. So for any method to be used as queueable method, I need to call this interface. Correct? That is how it is. Okay. So instead of I writing everything, these are predefined, just for simple understandings, understand it as a predefined class which I'm implementing on this class, so that some methods from that can be used here. Got it? Some logics from there can be used here. So to make a complete class as a queueable class, you have to implement the queueable interface on your class. Okay. This interface enables you to add jobs to the queue and monitor them. So this interface, this library basically allows you to add jobs to the queue and monitor them. Okay, which is an enhanced way of running your asynchronous Apex code compared to using future methods. Okay. So queueable Apex is an enhanced way of running your future methods. Okay, why it is enhanced? There are a few reasons for that. I will tell you. Earlier we just had future methods. Okay, so future method, the problem was that it can only be made for one method. So if I have a process, 3 4 methods to be executed, then it was a bit difficult. I can make all of them at future annotation, but I'm not very sure then which one will get executed first out of 4. If I want them in a process, that does not happen, right? So that was a bit of challenge. So now Salesforce has come up with this queueable Apex. So this is an enhanced way of running your asynchronous Apex code compared to your future method. For Apex processes that run for a long time, such as extensive database operations, you can use Queueable Apex. You can run them asynchronously by implementing the Queueable interface and adding a job to the Apex job queue. So this is what we have to do. So if there is a long running process, not just one method, then you can implement the Queueable interface on the class. Okay. In this way, your asynchronous Apex job runs in the background in its own thread. Okay, so in this way, what happens is complete job. It's not one method. A job is again, entire class being executed. So this entire job runs in the background in its own thread and doesn't delay the execution of your main Apex logic. So if there is some main Apex logic running, that is also not delayed, and it runs in the background whenever the resources become available. Each queued job runs when system resources become available. So the same thing. In future method, we were talking about a method. Here we are talking about a job. So job can be executing a class or something, or executing a batch. Okay. So queuable jobs are similar to future methods in that they are both queued for execution. So one similarity, that both of them are queued for execution, and both of them, get executed once the resources become available. So that is a similarity. But they provide you with these additional benefits. But the Queueable Apex has a few additional benefits. I was just telling you that Queueable Apex is the new way of executing jobs. So it comes up with a few benefits on top of future method. So future method we understand. Now how is Queueable Apex different, and what are the benefits? Okay, so before I talk about this, let me just tell you how will you write a Queueable Apex. So in case of Queueable Apex, you just have to say public class, whatever class name, let's say my class, and you have to implement Queueable interface. Implements Queueable. That's what you have to do. Get it? So in this case, I was not implementing any interface. I just made the method as future. In this case, you have to make the entire class queuable. Okay. So this is what I'm doing. So this is why, these are two additional words you have to do in case you want to make your class queuable, right? Now, how is queuable better than feature method? So one benefit definitely what we saw there is queuable interface makes the entire class queuable so that all the methods in the class get queued, right? So it can be a complete job instead of just one method. So that's one advantage. What are the other advantages? Okay. First benefit is getting an ID for your job. When you submit your job by invoking the system.enqueue job method, the method returns the ID of the new job. Okay. So if you don't understand this, don't worry. Let me make it simple for you. First advantage is a queuable apex generates a job ID. So it's a job which is getting executed and it generates a job ID, which means for you that does not, that does not make any sense at all. Only thing that we benefit from that job ID is we can monitor the job. What is the status of it? If it generates a job ID, then I will have an option of monitoring it. So it makes my life easier so that I can monitor and understand what is the status. Has it got executed or not executed, or what is the status? That's not possible with the future method. Future method does not generate any ID, which means I cannot track it. So what is the status? Got it? Makes sense? Apart from that, the job ID gets generated. We have got
Where
nothing
can I
to.
get that ID?
Sorry, I will.
Where can I see that ID?
Yeah. So when you run the Queueable Apex now, you can just go here and monitor your jobs, and if you have any scheduled jobs, sorry, scheduled job, Apex jobs. So your Queueable Apex jobs will come here, and you will also get to see the status, which class, which method, Apex job ID. Got it? So all of them will get executed here. Got it? So when you submit a Queueable Apex, it generates an ID and you will be able to track the status of that in that Apex jobs. Okay. So getting an ID for your job, which means when you submit your job by invoking system.enqueue job method, the method returns the ID of the new job, which ultimately means for us that we will be able to track what is the status of the job. Okay. You can use this ID to identify your job and monitor its progress. Okay, so you can use this ID to monitor the progress, what is actually happening. Second advantage with Queueable Apex is using non-primitive data types. So with Queueable Apex, you have the option of using non-primitive data types also. Your Queueable class can contain member variables of non-primitive data types. Now, because this is a class, this is not a method where you have to uh, basically fetch sorry pass the parameter as an S object or something, right? It's a class. So inside the class you can use non-primitive data types also as member variables. So inside the class you can define your own uh, S-object variables also, right? So you can use non-primitive data types here. Okay, just yeah, non-primitive data types such as S-object or custom apex types. Those objects can be accessed when the job executes. So when the job actually executes, those objects can be accessed. All right. So use of non-primitive data type is the other advantage of Queueable Apex. Third advantage of Queueable Apex is chaining jobs. That is what I was talking. The first advantage which I was talking about, that I can have multiple methods lined up. Okay. So that is one. And you can also have a chaining job. Chaining job means, let's say I have my class 1 and I have another class, my class 2. Okay, and I have, let's say, two methods here, and I can have three methods here. Okay, what I want to do is I just want to make sure that before these methods get executed, I want to make sure that these methods have been executed. Okay, so in that case what I will do is, here after these two methods I can call my class 2. Because I'm inside a class, I can have one more method to call the other class, other Queueable job. Okay, so then what will happen, it will become a chain of jobs. So this I initiate, let's say I initiate this manually. Okay, and then this gets executed, and then I call the second one, and then that gets executed. Correct. So chaining jobs is possible with the Queueable Apex. Okay, so let's take a simple example, and there's one more thing that you just have to understand. That is, the method inside this Queueable class. Okay, the Queueable class that you're defining. The name of the method inside that class has to be execute. Okay, so execute is a method which will actually execute your uh, whatever Apex program that you want to execute and stuff. Right. So all that you have to do is you just have to write a small code and execute that. Okay, let's say I want to do this simple example. Okay, let me write it on as an as a Queueable class only. New class, public class, let's say Q class implements Queueable. Okay, your actual code logic will go here. Public static void execute. So your code goes here. Whatever code you want to execute, you just write that code here. Okay, and there's just one more keyword here, Queueable context. Queueable context. Yeah, just a comment. That's it. You can give it any name. Okay, so take this also as syntax, and now whatever you want to do, just define that. Let's say I want to insert one account. Account A equals new account name equals my new account 2. Insert A. That's it. All right. So your class is ready. Now, how do you execute this class? We can do it from some other method, as I told you, or I can do it from my. For now, let's do it from our anonymous code block. So let me not go and write something else. I can do it from my anonymous code block. So all that you have to do here is just go and write this. That's it. So say id job id equal to system.enq job. Okay, new. Okay. Okay, new. This should be your class name. Queueable class name is what? That's it. Okay, and let me execute this. So it got executed. This is my job. Okay, so this should ideally go into the queue, and it should also generate a job ID. This is a job that I have started. Let's go and track. It has got queued. Yes. So this is a job ID. This was the class. Okay, and queueable completed. Got it? So if it was batch apex, then it would have also given you to how many total batches, how many of them completed, how many of them failed, and all that stuff. But here we don't have that. So this execution is done because it is a small one, and now resources are pretty much available. There's nothing, no other big operation is happening on the database. So that is the reason why it got queued up and it completed. Clear on the queuable thing? Now you can just go and write whatever code you want inside that class, the one that we created, but it has to be within that execute method. Okay. Now, if you have another job to be executed, you could have called that inside that execute method. That is what I was saying, that you can do that other thing also, chaining. So that chaining jobs is available. All right. Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So that's about Queueable Apex,
Yeah, Jeet.
right? Okay. So we're clear on that. Clear on that? Any questions, doubts on Queueable Apex? Simple. Just write your
No, Jeet, I'm
Apex, and this is how you can execute it. Now, how you call it, this is up to you. I did it from from my anonymous code block. You can call it from some button or wherever you want. All right. Okay. So basically, what you have to do is you just have to call the system.enqueue job. So that is what you have to do. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Jeet.
Okay. So that was about Queueable Apex. Now let's talk about the other type of Apex, invoking other way of invoking Apex. That's an Apex scheduler. So we have seen two ways, right? One is uh, making a method as a future method so that it executes in future when the resources become available. Second is making a complete class as queuable and queuing the entire job. That is one thing. Now third is Apex scheduler. What is Apex scheduler? As the name suggests, scheduler thing is like scheduling your Apex code. So this is where you don't have to manually go and do anything. Your Apex can be scheduled to run on a defined frequency every Saturday, every Friday, every night, whatever. Okay. So to invoke Apex classes to run at specific times, you just need to do simple stuff. So it's again simple. It's very similar to your Apex, queuable Apex, but just that this is where you can define a schedule and it can keep on running on that defined schedule. If you have done scheduled report, you might have seen that there is a, we have an option of defining the schedule for report, and then the report keeps on executing on the defined frequency or defined schedule. Same thing can be done with an Apex class also. Okay, so it's very simple. All that you have to do is you just have to implement the schedulable interface for the class, specify the schedule using the schedulable schedule Apex page in the Salesforce interface. All right. So first thing that you have to do is you just have to use the schedulable interface for the class. So previous example we did implements queueable. This time we will say implements schedulable. All right. And then we just have to go and define the schedule for the Apex page through the Apex page. Okay. So we can define the schedule when we want it to run. Okay. The schedulable interface contains one method that must be implemented. Okay. Which is called execute method. So execute method was there in our Queueable class also, right? Salesforce schedules the class for execution at the specified time. Actual execution may be delayed based on service availability. So because this is again asynchronous, you can schedule things, but it will not happen dot at that particular time or that thing. Okay, so it might get delayed if the resources are not available or not. So that's pretty simple that we understand. You can only have 100 scheduled Apex jobs at one time. So at any given point of time, you cannot have more than 100 scheduled Apex jobs. Okay, so that's quite decent number, 100 scheduled Apex jobs. Okay, now all that we have to do is let's just go ahead and learn how do we write scheduled Apex. Everything is same, or let me write it in this only. So just go ahead and create a class, develop Apex classes, new public class is class 1, let's say, implements schedulable. So this is what you have to implement here. This interface, schedulable interface, will use here. Public static void method one. Sorry, execute. Name of the method has to be execute, and say schedulable context, whatever, something. Now your code here. That's what you have to do. Let's say the same thing. Account A equals new account insert A name equals my new account 3. That's it. Whatever code you want to execute. Written, class is ready, method defined. Okay, so this is the method that I want to execute on a defined frequency. All right, so all that we have to do is we just have to go to Apex classes and define the schedule for it. This is not a one-time execution, right? This is a schedule Apex scheduler. So I will use schedule Apex here. So where you write your Apex classes, there you have a schedule Apex option. Just click on this and then select the class. So only the classes which implement schedulable interface will be available here. Job name, give whatever job name you want. My schedule job. And what is the frequency for this? Is it monthly or is it weekly? You just define, let's say every Sunday or every Friday. If you have from when does it start till when it continues till 30th June, let's say. If you have a preferred time, as I told you, preferred time you can define, but it ideally should start at that point of time. But if it does not find the resources available, it can get a little delayed also. So okay. Exact start time will depend on job queue activity. So if you have more jobs, queued up and all that, depends on that. So let's say I wanted to execute at 1 p.m. weekly. Save the schedule. That's it. Now this code will get executed every Friday 1 p.m. You can see this job here on the scheduled jobs. Correct? So to track the scheduled jobs, you can come check the scheduled jobs. To track other jobs, you can just go and check the Apex jobs. Fine. So general Apex jobs will come here. Scheduled jobs will be, there. Okay. So each time the job gets executed, that will come here as an Apex job. Okay. So that's about the Apex scheduler. So in case you want to execute an Apex, on a defined frequency or on a defined schedule, then use Apex scheduler. This is also simple. Okay. Now the next one, the batch Apex. So three things we have learned by now: future method, Queueable Apex, Apex scheduler, which uses a schedulable interface. Now the third thing, batch Apex. What is batch Apex? A developer can now employ batch Apex to build complex long-running processes. Okay. As the name suggests, before we start reading about this, as the name suggests, batch Apex. What does a batch mean? Small batches, right? So if I have a long-running process, or if I have a big process, let's say I have to update 2 million records, instead of doing updating 2 million records at once, what I can do is I can actually start the process in small batches. Okay, so I can form small batches of 1000 record and execute the method again, form small batch of 1000 records and execute, right? So that's something which can be done. All right. A developer can now employ batch Apex to build complex long running processes, okay, that run on thousands of records on the force.com platform. Batch Apex operates over small batches of records. Instead of performing a big operation on the entire set of data, what I can do is I can perform it in small batches of records, covering your entire record set and breaking the processing down to manageable chunks. So it can cover your entire big set of data, but all that in small chunks. Instead of doing a big processing, it can just do that in small chunks. Okay. For example, data cleansing operation that goes through all accounts and all opportunities. Let's say you just want to perform a data cleansing, activity on all the accounts, and then you just don't want to, do that in one process. You just forming, big Apex operation in small chunks of records. All right. So it has three parts. Okay, so basically things like data cleansing operation that are huge and all. Okay, so this batch Apex has three parts actually. Okay, three sections. First is forming the batch. Second is executing the process. Okay. Third is performing an action at the finish of all the batches. Correct. So first part, basically, so batch Apex should have three methods actually. So first method should form the batches for me. Like schedulable Apex had just one method, Queueable Apex had just one method, right? Now whatever we want to do, we put the inside that execute method. Batch Apex has an execute method, but apart from that, there are two more methods. So first method is for collecting the data, which for basically forming the batches. So instead of the entire set of records, I just will form small batches. Second is for executing. So one execution will perform one batch, and then the second execution, and whatever number of execution till the time all the records, in my scope are completed. Third is a finish method. Finish method is basically used for doing anything which needs to be done at the end of all the batches execution. Let's say you just want to send an email to someone when all the batches have been successfully executed. So there is a finish method also. Okay. So it basically has three things to be defined. So let's do a small example of a batch apex and see that. So as I told you, a batch apex should implement database.batchable. Okay, so this is what it should implement, and it should have three methods. One is start, second is execute, third is finish. Okay, start will is to get the data ready in batches. Actual code execution, what you want to do. Anything you want to do at end of all batches. End of processing of all batches. So once all the batches have been processed, then if you want to do something, maybe sending an email, updating some other field or something, whatever you want to do, right? So let's do a small example. Let's say I want to update all my accounts. Okay, all the accounts which are there in the system, I want to update all of them, and I want to do that in batches of small five records each. Okay, because I just have very few records, so I'll do that in small batches of 5 records each. So first thing that I will need to do is I just need to go ahead and create an apex class. First thing. So we write a public class, batch class, whatever, name it something, implements database dot batchable subject okay. Now here what I'm gonna do is I am gonna use, it should be database dot query locator start. Okay, database dot query locator. So this is not a void method. Start method is not a void method. Start method is something which returns a database dot query locator. What is database dot query locator? Database dot query locator is uh, a method in the database class. If you remember database class that we were talking about the other day, there is a method in the database class which can take a query, okay, which can take a query and return the results. Okay, so here because I need to supply some query, how do I want to form the batches and all? So for that, start method is not a void method. Okay, so it returns database dot query locator. So your this thing should be database dot batchable context, whatever, and return database dot get query locator. Okay, so this is where I should provide my query. This is where you should write your query. Okay, let me do it a little differently. Let me define a string and pass the query as a parameter. Let's make it global. Make this also global. Query string okay. Okay, so this is what we will supply and this will be called here. So that's my start method. Okay, you could have written a query here itself, but I just want to supply the query at the time of initiating the batch. So that's fine, so that I can decide on what kind of a query I want to run. All right, so one method is done. Second method that I need is,
Do we need to write global? What is the difference?
see, global is something which can be executed even from outside your Apex environment. Correct. So, sometimes something which is not within the Salesforce environment or within the Apex environment, it can be executed from there as well, right? So that is how it is. So here in this case does not make that much of a difference. But if you're defining a batch Apex or an Apex scheduler or any asynchronous Apex, it's a good habit to use the global constructor here. Fine. Because if you are calling it from outside also, it can be recognized. Fine. But here anyhow we're going to work within the Salesforce limits only. Private is something which is identified only within the class. Public is something which is identified only within my Salesforce org. Global is something which is identified even outside the Salesforce org. Maybe from some other website or maybe from some other place, right? So we just need to write list of point okay. So this list of S object scope is what is the scope for a batch. Queries have been formed. Now the set of data that gets processed in one batch is the scope. Correct? So that is what we have. I need to define other things also. String entity. This is going to be which object we want to update. This is our query. So I'm going to supply value to all of them at the time of execution. Okay. String field This will be the field that needs to be updated and string value to be assigned to the field. Okay. So for my scope of record, one batch, one execution will be for one batch, right? It's not going to be for the entire set. Batches have been formed here. Okay, one batch set of records is scope. So all that you have to do is you just have to go ahead and write for S object, because you do not know which S object we're talking about. Let's say S object S within scope, or that scope, whatever you want to do now. Okay, let's say S dot put field value. So in the field, just put the value that I want to put. So these two things will again come from here, right? Update scope. Okay. There's one more method which is going to be my void method again, finish method. Global void finish. Again, in this method you can do whatever you want. If you don't want to do anything, that's also fine. Implements.
Database, first line.
Batchable.
At the end, you have used angle, right?
So, okay. So my string query and the field and the value and all that stuff is there. Okay. This will, the query value we have to pass. Field, which field we want to update, that we have to pass. Value we have to pass the field update. Which object we want to do that, that also we have to pass. Okay. So now let's run this batch from the anonymous code block. You can again do it from anywhere, so we'll do it from the anonymous code block. So we should supply our query equals select name description from count where okay, I want to do it for all account, right? Limit 5. So this is the query that should form these batches. Okay, entity is going to be account. Field that I want to update is, let's say, description. Description. And value will be count updated. So these are all parameters that we'll have to pass. Okay, there's one more thing that we'll have to do here is define a constructor here. Global string q string e string f string v. Okay, now we would just go to our this thing, anonymous code block. These things I have to supply from my side. Okay, so you have to say string string field and here you say id. Here this is not a Queueable apex, here it should be batch instance id, batch instance id equals database dot executable execute batch. New name of the class, batch class. QEFV. So these are what we have supplied there. Okay, now let's go and check if the batches got executed and if my account description has got updated.
Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
hello, yeah,
Jeet.
yeah, Nirmala, tell me.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Jeet.
Hello, yeah, Nirmala. Can you hear me?
I'm not able to hear you, Jeet.
Now,
Hello.
hello, hello.